I know that you can probably never have all the information before you go into a decision, but how do you find that stopping point where you say, I think I have enough information that I feel comfortable making this trade?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think with any investment you're looking at, I'll take a tangent and come back to your question. Many years back, I was talking to Charlie and he encouraged me to discuss my investments, not so much with an analyst who might work for me, but with a peer investor who cared about me and was a good investor. So he said, I always had someone to talk to. He said, Mohnish, and it's a big advantage because sometimes we as investors have blind spots. So I told him also, like in your case, Charlie, for example, you have Warren to bounce investment ideas off. He says, well, it wasn't always Warren, but it's very helpful to have somebody who you can discuss your ideas with. So we all have our circle of competence. We all have our blind spots. So one thing that is useful is to generally bring your ideas to some person who you trust and who cares deeply about you and is also a good investor. That's an important thing. But I think beyond that, you obviously want to get to an aha moment, which is telling you, here's all the reasons why this investment is a no-brainer and the world doesn't get it, but eventually they will. And here's why it makes sense. I think that what I have found in 25 plus years of investing is the greed portion of our brain can sometimes mislead us. And so it's really important to have circuit breakers on that greed. So one of the circuit breakers I have is I have a pre-investment checklist. It has like 160 or 170 questions on it. And I run any investment through those questions before I invest. And the big value the checklist adds is that the first time I run it, it'll pop up maybe 10 or 20 questions where I don't know the answer. And what that says to me is, listen, dummy, you are not done with the work. You can't even answer these questions. So first go and figure out the answer. And figuring out that answer might take several weeks of work, which is fine, or might take several days. And once you can answer all the questions intelligently, the checklist has done its job. It's going to highlight things that are likely possible failure points in the investment. Every single company, you can come up with scenarios where that business is going to have struggles in the future. And the question you're trying to answer is, what are the likelihood probabilities that happens or doesn't happen in that business versus what you think are the good things that could happen in the business. So I think the circuit breaker is important. Talking to somebody you trust is important. Being patient and thinking through why something would not work or what are the issues that could cause a permanent loss of capital. That's where the focus needs to be. The upside will take care of itself. I think your aha moment is already probably showing an upside. The question is, how do you protect the downside?
Could you go through an example, not a current holding, but maybe a former holding that either worked really well and you learned a lesson from, or worked not so well and you learned a lesson from, just to sort of put some of this into practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we don't really learn much for the businesses that we do well with. Those just feel great. Well done, Mohnish. That's about it. That's all you're going to get out of those investments. It's the failures. I mean, it's the same thing when you're in school. The classes that are easy A's don't teach you much. The classes where you have to struggle and you maybe get a B or you're, C level, C average, trying to pull a B out or whatever. Those are the ones that really teach you a lot in investing. And that's why it's always important to have a real portfolio, real brokerage account, not do this through a spreadsheet, because you need to feel the pain. You need to feel the pain because you will lose money. It's guaranteed. John Templeton said one out of 3 times we're going to be wrong when we invest, at least 1 out of 3 times. I think that failures teach you a lot. In 2008, for example, I had an investment in a subprime mortgage lender, Delta Financial, went to zero. That was painful because we had a concentrated portfolio. We had 60, 70 million invested in it, and it all went to zero. I've had a number of difficulties over the years with investments in finance and banking companies. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to go there. So generally speaking, if a bank comes up on the radar, I don't even bother to look anymore. I just say it's a pass. Okay. Now, if you look at someone like Warren Buffett, in his entire career, he's, I believe, never been wrong on a banking investment. And he used to have an investment in a bank in Illinois, First Rockford, in the 1960s. It was one of the first acquisitions Berkshire had done. And I have a friend who used to be an intern at First Rockford at that time. And he'd say that Warren would show up once a month to visit First Rockford from Omaha. He traveled there. And he said the whole place would be in a frenzy for several days before Warren showed up because they knew, he never forgets a number. He's asking a bunch of questions. But that particular bank was probably one of the best run banks in the country. Their write-offs of bad debts for decades approached zero. So it was a single branch bank in Rockford. The founder knew all the major business owners, and the founder was very deeply involved in all the underwriting decisions. So pretty much every loan, he had to approve it, and he wasn't going to approve loans to deadbeats. And they had an exceptional track record in terms of how with the loans. And Buffett is a really good banking analyst. He's had investments in Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Bank of America, M&T Bank, on and on. Every one of them has been a home run. And it's worked out really well for him. On the other hand, if you look at his track record with retailers, it's been terrible. And he doesn't talk about it much because he doesn't like to, discourage his managers. But I would say that almost all of the retail investments Berkshire Hathaway has made, which have been dozens of retail investments, only a couple of them have done really well. Nebraska Furniture Mart has done well. Borsheim's have done well. Almost every other jeweler they bought has done terribly. Almost every other furniture operation they bought has done terribly. And almost every other retail operation they bought has done terribly. Because in general, retail is just so hard. It's so hard to do well that even a Warren Buffett struggles. So there are SIC codes where Warren excels, and there are SIC codes where Warren does poorly. And that's the situation with all of us. And the earlier you figure out what you're really good at and what to avoid, like I've figured out, I took a lot of painful arrows in the back. I wish I knew this 25 years ago. And, but, I don't really want to own banks or finance companies. I repeatedly get hosed with those. And so I'm done, I had enough for a lifetime. On the other hand, I've done very well in other areas where, like in a lot of commodity businesses, which are low cost, those have worked really well, low cost producers. And a number of different kinds of businesses, which I've been able to handicap well, have worked out well.